we think about the jobs that are going to be provided, but the revenues also provide social programs and services, not just for Haisla, but for the region.
Tonight, a $2.5 billion LNG project draws praise and fire.
Happy Indigenous Nurses Day.
Plus, it's a day to celebrate Indigenous nurses.
It's going to be well over 10,000 and growing.
And a potential class action lawsuit is looking at dental care provided by the federal government. Good evening, Tansei Aneen. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Cedar LNG, the first Indigenous-owned facility of its kind in Canada, is moving ahead in British Columbia. The Haisla Nation are majority owners. They see the project as a way to economic independence. But critics question BC's commitment to net zero emission goals. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Haisla Nation Chief Councillor Crystal Smith enters the nation's administration office. Last month, BC issued an environmental assessment certificate for Cedar LNG. The federal government also approved the project. The project is a Haisla majority-owned, floating $2.4 billion liquefied natural gas facility and export terminal that will be located on the Douglas Channel in northern BC.
And it is definitely an amplified feeling being a part of a project that is majority owned by our people. So it is definitely an exciting opportunity to witness and to have been a part of.
At a press conference, the BC government said Cedar LNG will be the largest First Nation majority owned infrastructure project in Canada. BC Premier David Eby said it would be one of the lowest emitting facilities in the world. The Haisla Nation have been working on the project for more than a decade. The Haisla partnered with Pembina Pipeline Corporation. The Cedar LNG board decisions are guided by the nation.
We chose lesser environmental impacts over economies. So essentially the technology that the project is going to be run on e-drive, which is power from the grid, from hydro, and also air cooling versus water cooling, which are minimized impacts. However, cost a little bit more for the technology.
The project will receive natural gas from northeastern BC through the controversial Coastal GasLink project. A portion of the pipeline is contested by Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. BC Hydro Grid will power the project with renewable electricity. Cedar LNG will create 500 jobs during construction and 100 permanent jobs when completed. It will have the capacity to export 3 million tons per year to Asian markets.
We think about the jobs that are going to be provided, but the revenues also provide social programs and services, not just for Haisla, but for the region. And we're definitely proud to be able to have the opportunity to contribute to those social projects.
Environmental groups and some Indigenous leaders, such as the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, were critical of BC granting approval. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip believes there is no way the province meets net zero carbon emission goals.
We know that it's going to make it virtually impossible for BC to meet its targets on greenhouse gas emissions. And the most destructive thing about that particular project is the fracking. There's no such thing as natural gas, there's only frack gas, and it's incredibly destructive to the environment.
Chief Smith believes Cedar LNG and LNG Canada are part of global solutions, citing the government's strict environmental guidelines.
BC and Canada have the most strict environmental processes. We believe that we're providing the most environmentally sound products to the rest of the world that aren't provided this type of energy. We still have parts of the world that are burning coal, that are higher emitting.
The Cedar LNG facility has jumped a major hurdle, but still has obstacles to move forward, including securing more funding. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat Village.
We want to hear what you think about Cedar LNG moving ahead. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca, or you can leave us a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A 64-year-old Saskatchewan man is being charged with first-degree murder after he allegedly killed the man charged in his son's death. Reginald DeRocher is accused of killing his son's alleged killer. Ryan Clark, 34, was waiting for trial in the 2016 beating death of Christopher DeRocher. He was originally convicted of second-degree murder in 2018, but the Supreme Court of Canada had ordered a retrial for Clark in December of 2022. Reginald DeRocher allegedly hit and killed Clark on April the 4th with his pickup truck. The RCMP later found the truck on the Little Red Reserve, 42 kilometers north of Prince Albert. Reginald DeRocher is charged with a first-degree murder of Ryan Clark. A valuable beach in Ontario's Bruce Peninsula region will return to the Saugeen First Nation. CTV's Scott Miller brings us this report.
It appears the ownership of one of Ontario's most famous beaches is changing hands. In a landmark decision, an Ontario Superior Court of Justice has decided that the Saugeen First Nation are the rightful owners to a very valuable 2.5-kilometer stretch of Sauble Beach shoreline stretching north of Sauble Beach's iconic sign. Simply put, the court has confirmed the entire beach belongs to the Saugeen First Nation and always has. The court has also ruled that the federal government violated our rights under Treaty 72 by failing to preserve the entirety of our reserve after we signed the treaty in 1854. In 1995, the Saugeen First Nation laid claim to a stretch of Sauble Beach's shoreline encompassing the most used and popular section of the beach that sees over 400,000 tourists each summer. The town of South Bruce Peninsula claims they own that stretch of beach and fought the claim for decades, turning down a 2014 mediated settlement that led to a 6-month-long trial in early 2022.
I'm actually pleased with it. I did spend a lot of time researching the case, and I think justice was served today.
Previous Saugeen First Nation chiefs have said that if they were to win this land dispute, that almost nothing would change along Sauble Beach for summer beachgoers. Public access would remain.
I don't know that much about it, but I hope it stays the same.
I think as long as people take care of the land, right, it's freshest water in the world.
The Saugeen First Nation already owns and operates a swath of Sauble Beach stretching south of Sauble's iconic sign.
I think they deserve to make money on the beach, just like the private landowners had made money now. The town is charging $30 to park. Hopefully the town and Saugeen First Nation can come to an agreement to maybe share in that revenue.
Parking revenues from the town-owned section of the beach raise nearly $1 million every summer. The town of South Bruce Peninsula had this to say about today's decision as they consider whether to appeal or not. This is a complex issue that requires time to formalize a position. Council understands how important this issue is to the town and thanks all residents in advance for their patience. The Saugeen First Nation had this to say: "This has been a long fight over many decades, but the hard work by leadership and our people has paid off, and we have achieved a huge victory that we should all celebrate together." A further court proceeding will determine potential damages owed to the Saugeen First Nation for breaking the 1854 treaty that was supposed to keep Sauble Beach's shoreline under their stewardship. In Sauble Beach, Scott Miller, CTV News.
It is the second annual Indigenous Nurses Day today. It was founded to honor Edith Montour, a Six Nations woman who was the first Indigenous registered nurse in Canada. The now annual event officially celebrates Indigenous nurses across Canada. The day promotes cultural integrity and acknowledges the contributions of Indigenous nurses. Multiple reports into systemic racism in the healthcare system point to poor outcomes for Indigenous patients, something that the nurses and nurse practitioners of BC want to correct. Here's registered nurse Dawn Tisdale from a 2022 video produced by the NNPBC.
Indigenous nurses have been at the forefront of care since contact. They've been leading the way to improve a healthcare system that has been inequitable and unjust towards Indigenous people. These nurses have paved the way for all of us that have followed, and today is a day where we can honor and recognize these often unseen contributions. Happy Indigenous Nurses Day.
All right, we have to pause the news for a moment. When we return, a new class action lawsuit aimed at federal dental care is gaining traction.
It's going to be well over 10,000 and growing.
Welcome back to APTN National News. The Northwest Territories has some of the highest rates of police-reported family violence in the country. Advocacy groups are looking to change that and are bringing their solutions to the table. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings you this story.
It's not every day the Native Women's Association of the Northwest Territories can bend the ear of a federal minister. But when they get the chance to, they outline the issues and, more importantly, the solutions.
Her husband came with her to work every day and sat with her, and she couldn't go anywhere without him. So things like that are really normalized in the communities, and we want to change that at Native Women, so we need to have connection. They need to have connection.
Executive Director Brenda Norris says NWT-NWAC worries about the potential for several remote communities to be left in the dark by satellite internet and phone providers.
All of those 7 communities as well will never probably be hooked up to the internet because, like Little, okay, they're way too far away. The community is too small, the appetite to do it.
NWAC has already secured funding for research through the federal government's Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities program. Now they're hoping to bring 7 families in 7 communities SpaceX Starlink high-speed internet service.
But there's a lot of people who are on income assistance or they're on pensions. They can't afford the amount of money it costs for them to get Starlink.
And it's important not to put the cart before the horse, as politicians pitch domestic violence and missing person initiatives, reliant on connectivity, as is being discussed in a recent meeting between NWAC NWT and Federal Minister of Public Safety on a red dress alert program in the works.
Mainstream media and the like to put in place a notification so that the community is aware that an individual, a woman or a young girl has gone missing as quickly as possible.
Also front row and center for Native Women's public engagement sessions to discuss gun violence.
If you go and you grab your gun and you use it, you will lose you won't be able to hunt, you won't have a gun. I think it's really important to go to those communities and give that message.
In February, the federal government dropped amendments to proposed firearms legislation, amendments opposed by Indigenous groups and NWT Liberal MP Michael McLeod.
Stolen guns, and that points to, storage is not where it should be, or else guns are the target. So there's lots of things that we have to look at, and I'm always reminding the minister that, okay, well, if some guns are going to be illegal, then we have to find a program to reimburse hunters and trappers.
McLeod says it's about striking a balance for victims of gun violence while respectful of Indigenous needs. NWAC agrees.
He gets charged, he goes to jail, Gladue gets him out early, and then he still doesn't have a license to hunt, and so now the family is all suffering, including the wife and the children who were victims to start with. Now they're victims again.
NWAC also suggests introducing financial incentives for NWT residents to purchase gun cabinets when they acquire their possession and acquisition license. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
A future class action lawsuit will focus on dental care for Indigenous patients administered by the federal government from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Some of the incidents being alleged involve removing healthy teeth, drilling without freezing, and work being done in hospital basements. CTV's Brady Lang has more.
Always that fear of getting hit all the time.
Melissa McKay of Papikasis still lives in fear of going to the dentist. She is one of hundreds expected to join a class action lawsuit against Indigenous Services Canada.
I remember laying there with your mouth open, and they put that rubber over your mouth and it covers you.
From the 60s to the 80s, students as young as 5 were taken to dentists hired by what was then known as Indian Affairs, and these were no ordinary dentists.
And the needles, and then they would do work without waiting for the freezing to set in.
McKay says she can still remember the first time she was sent to see the dentist. She was at the old day school on Papicasis. She was a kindergarten student, and her and all of her peers were packed into a bus and sent 18 kilometers away to neighboring Balcarres.
To the old hospital. And then the dentist was down in the basement.
The experience has led to struggles for McKay in the years following.
Ever since then, as soon as I go to a dentist, I have very bad anxiety attacks. I can't breathe. I want to get sick. I have to run to the bathroom. I'm shaking. And it's just as soon as I sit in that chair and that smell, and it just, that's that trigger, and it takes me right back, and then I grab my face because I'm waiting for that slap.
McKay spent much of her school years in Balcarres. She recalls how she and her Indigenous classmates were pulled out of class and taken to the neighboring hospital for treatment. It was a yearly event and one most students dreaded. The suit, in its early stages, is looking for anyone impacted from coast to coast across Canada. The band members' Advocacy Alliance Association of Canada is working on the case with a Calgary-based law firm.
The interest in this is substantial. Our call volume and email response has been enormous.
Indigenous Services Canada did not respond to a request for comment by deadline Wednesday. For McKay, she thinks the suit feels like closure.
It brings up the past that I can deal with now. I can talk about it and I can get rid of it.
Brady Lang, CTV News, Yorkton.
Rob Louie is the president of the Band Members Advocacy Alliance Association of Canada, and he joins us now for more on this. Rob, thank you so much for joining us here. What can you tell us about this lawsuit and how did it come about?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. So it was over the past year when BMAC was in Saskatchewan on a number of different legal issues, ranging from election matters to the cows and plows, where I've also heard calls for help around past substandard and harmful dental practices that were performed on primarily the Cree First Nations in Saskatchewan.
Now, Rob, do you have a sense of how many people may be affected?
Well, a conservative estimate right now is about 10,000 people, and that's going to increase because these are the First Nations in and around the Meadow Lake or central Saskatchewan, southern Saskatchewan, and the average reserve number is 1,000 to 3,000 people per community. So I'm doing the math on it, and it's going to be well over 10,000 and growing.
Now, Rob, why did your organization specifically want to spearhead this?
Yes, our mandate is to help band members get access to justice. We are the only registered national nonprofit organization in Canada that does this type of work. So we do partner with the legal community, i.e. with law firms in Canada, to help us fulfill our mandate. So we are grateful to have the legal services of D.D. West, a law firm in Calgary that specializes in class action. And the lead class action lawyer is Mr. Bill Klein, whom I've got to know over the past year.
And Rob, last one for you here. What's the response been like to this, and what are some of the next steps?
Yes, the response started to grow just after the Christmas holiday. Every day when I check my email, there are at least 5 to 20 email responses or calls for help saying, hey, can you send me the application form for the class action? I'd like to be a part of it.
All right, Rob. Well, there's certainly a lot to think about here. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us a bit of what's going on here.
Thank you kindly. Have a great day.
We reached out to Indigenous Services Canada, and they sent a statement saying they could not comment on potential legal actions. A statement said, in part, that they remain committed to advancing reconciliation and building relationships with Indigenous partners. All right, we have to step aside one final time, but stick around. A preview of another great face-to-face is next. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. An early morning sundog captured and sent in by Nicole Friesen. Nicole captured this during an early morning from Gillam, Manitoba. Thanks so much for sending that in, Nicole. We want to see your photos with the coming of spring. Send your pictures to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning on the East Coast, 9 degrees in St. John's and 16 in Halifax. +1 in Kuujjuaq and 8 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 7 degrees in Quebec City and 12 degrees in Val-d'Or. Clear and 25 degrees in Toronto and 17 in Sault Ste. Marie. 21 degrees in Elliott Lake and 10 in Thunder Bay. -8 in Churchill and +9 in Norway House. 11 degrees in Barons River, and Winnipeg is looking at 16. 9 degrees for Regina and 10 degrees for Saskatoon. 5 degrees in Buffalo Narrows, and Stony Rapids is looking at +4. As we continue our way west, 2 degrees in Fort Chipewyan and 10 in Grand Prairie. Edmonton's looking at 9 degrees, and Calgary's looking at 8 degrees. In Vancouver, 10 degrees, and Bella Coola's looking at 12. Clear and 8 degrees in Smithers, and clear and 10 in Fort Nelson. 2 degrees in Beaver Creek, and -7 with some snow in Rock River. -1 in Norman Wells, and +7 in Fort Simpson. -16 in Fort McPherson, and -5 in Colville Lake. -13 in Cambridge Bay, and clear and -12 in Chesterfield. Clear and -17 in Arctic Bay, and -15 in Iqaluit. An endangered species of sea turtle had some help reaching their forever home.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
More than 90 endangered baby loggerhead turtles were released into the wild on Australia's New South Wales central coast. The baby turtles made their way to the ocean, surrounded by wildlife experts, volunteers, and community members. That's so cute. A longtime journalist and news producer Francine Compton is our guest on tonight's episode of Face to Face. Compton, who is now an associate director with the Native American Journalists Association, has spent more than 20 years in the news business at both APTN and the public broadcaster. She says despite seeing major changes in the coverage of Indigenous issues, more Indigenous journalists are needed.
We do need a lot more Indigenous journalists. In the last couple of years, we have been dealing with a supply and demand issue. There are demands for Indigenous journalists. There are demands on us to be everywhere, to cover everything, and there aren't enough of us. And so that needs to change.
And don't go anywhere. You can catch that episode of Face to Face tonight in just a few minutes. That is all we have for you tonight. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech Kinanaskmitten. Have a great night.